So, you found a fit on a bad YouTube channel or something. Now what? Slap it on a ship and rock and roll, right? Well, maybe. But there's a good chance that the fit will either be suboptimal or that it will need adjustment to work for you. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that they're bad fits. In fact, you can find some really good fits floating around. The problem is that theory crafters have to make certain assumptions when designing fits for other people, and your particular circumstances might not perfectly align with those assumptions. For example, your corp may have a bunch of new bro-friendly fits that are designed to be flown by pretty much anyone, including players with 2 or 3 days worth of skill training. This makes it so that new bros can buy fits from contracts or the market and they'll just work. They don't have to worry about swapping out mods or accidentally undocking with their MWD offline. It'll just work. Unfortunately, however, designing for inclusivity means that those fits won't be optimized for those with better skills. They'll often have unnecessary fitting modules and favor new bro-friendly meta mods over T2 variants. In fact, let's look at an example. Here we have a Doctrine Osprey. The fit has been combat tested and proven, but it isn't the best possible fit for this particular character. The biggest problem with it, of course, is that the character has enough power grid that he doesn't need 2 power diagnostic systems. Of course, the second PDS is providing several bonuses, but the power grid bonus is completely wasted, and the shield recharge, cap capacity, and capacitor recharge bonuses are inconsequentially small when compared to the remote cap transfers and remote reps. Moreover, there's a nifty little low slot mod called the SIGAMP, which greatly benefits logic ships. Thus, to optimize the fit, we can swap the second PDS for a SIGAMP, which provides increased resistance to E-War, extra locks, increased target lock range, and faster lock times. Past that, we can also upgrade the compact power diagnostic system to a T2 variant, swap the compact large shield extenders for restrained versions, and swap the 2 compact remote shield boosters for scope variants. Now, the loss of the second PDS will result in a 3% reduction in shield buffer and an inconsequential reduction of cap stability, but in return, the fit is hardened against E-War, has better survivability, and is slightly better at repping fleetmates. And the changes only added about 500k to the cost of the fit. Of course, you might find yourself in the opposite situation. You may have found some awesome fit designed by a multi-year vet. The problem is that he designed it around the assumption that you have perfect or damn near perfect fitting and cap skills. So, does that mean you can't make the fit work for you? Well, maybe. It is possible that you just won't be able to make the fit work with your current skills, but it's also possible that you can get it working by making a few small compromises. So, that's what this class is all about. I want to teach you guys how to take fits that you find on YouTube, your corp fittings, the EVE University wiki, or wherever, and adjust them to your particular circumstances. Not only will this help to optimize your fits, but it is a solid first step on the road to creating your own fits from scratch. So, how about we get into it already? So, first things first, remove any unnecessary fitting modules. If you don't know what to replace it with, look at more advanced fits and see what they have. Generally speaking, however, it's hard to go wrong with more tank or spank. For example, check out this Merlin fit for New Bro Tackle, which has 2 micro auxiliary power cores. By maxing out our fitting and cap skills as an alpha, we'll open up several options. And do note, it's not hard to max out your support skills as long as you focus your training on about 4 ships, like 1 frigate, destroyer, cruiser, and battlecruiser. Anyway, one option is to swap one of the auxiliary power cores for another nanofiber structure, which can get us a 3-second align. Or we can swap it for a PDS, which gives us slightly more cap and HP. And if we wanted to, we could also spend a couple mil on upgrading the MWD, MSE, and nanofiber to restrained variants, which would help increase our survivability speed and possibly even our line time depending on skills. Finally, with really good fitting skills, we can get rid of the second fitting mod altogether and slap a damage control or damage mod on there. Given that the purpose of this fit is tackle, however, I think that the damage control is the way to go. Anyway, removing unnecessary fitting mods is a no-brainer, but adding fitting mods should be done with great care, if at all. You see, the problem with adding fitting mods is that you need to know where it's safe to make compromises. Unfortunately, if you need to add fitting mods, you're probably also a newer player, which means that you're unlikely to know where you can safely make compromises. Thus, generally speaking, you want to look at swapping out mods for compact variants first, and barring that, looking for a new bro-friendly fit to fly while you train up your skills. Also, do not forget about any of the tools you have at your disposal. For example, Incursion Scimitars need cap and power grid. In order to get there, they can use Genos, a power grid management implant, a capacitor systems operation implant, a capacitor management implant, a shield emission systems implant, cap batteries, cap rechargers, cap boosters, cap power relays, power diagnostic systems, reactor cores, cap control circuit rigs, semiconductor memory cell rigs, and or ancillary current router rigs. And then, on top of all that, you might still need to use bling, abyssals, and or drugs to make something that you're happy with. And don't worry if that laundry list of stuff made your eyes glaze over. It's really not as hard as it sounds. Just don't forget about all the tools that you have in your toolbox. Anyway, if you're going to use a fitting implant, try to use your brain. Match the cost of the implant to whole cost, risk, and in the case of PvE, how long it'll take for the implant to pay for itself. In other words, it's probably not the best idea to use a 6% power grid implant to get your Doctrine Osprey to work. If you find you're just a little short on fitting room, downgrading to meta-modules can be a good route to take. Of course, you need to use common sense, but you don't need to be a 10-year veteran to figure this stuff out. Just try to think about what are the most and least important attributes for your ship role and activity, and make compromises where it'll hurt your performance the least. For example, if you're flying tackle for a large fleet, you'd probably want to compromise on your damage output before you compromise on tackle range, speed, or agility. And I suppose we should probably talk about meta-modules. Alright, meta-mods follow one of two schemes. Those designed under the old system followed a tiered scheme, where modules improved in most, if not all aspects, as you moved up in meta levels. Of course, players flocked to the best mods and ignored the rest. Thus, in order to give players meaningful choice, CCP started redesigning meta mods so that each variant was better along one particular dimension. For example, Enduring MWDs use less cap, Restrained MWDs have smaller penalties to capacitor capacity and sig bloom, and compact microwarp drives have the smallest fitting requirements. And some modules may also be scope variants which give them better range. Anyway, do note that you can typically save a little bit of fitting room by downgrading a T2 mod for any meta variant. For example, all the meta MWDs use less power grid than the T2 version. So if you only need a little bit of fitting room, check to see if an Enduring or Restrained version works first. And then, if you still need more fitting room after that, then go for the compact variant. And note that you'll sometimes have to play around with your options. For example, I made this kiting fit for new players to be able to run one of the Rogue Swarm events. It was tight on CPU, so I told them to play around with the meta mods until they got the fit to work for them. So, let's assume they don't have weapon upgrades 5 yet, but they do have CPU management maxed out. This would mean that they would need to somehow free up 5 CPU. Looking at their options, you can see that certain downgrades won't cut the mustard. For example, a compact afterburner still isn't going to free up enough space. However, a compact afterburner and an Enduring tracking computer will. And if they don't like that option, they can downgrade something else. For example, the damage control isn't actually necessary for this fit, and I told my viewers that in the video. It was there merely as a safety net in case they messed up and found a new wave spawn on top of them. Thus, someone who didn't want to lose any ISK efficiency might have decided that they'd rather make a compromise in the tanking department and downgrade their DCU. In short, you may need to play around with different variants of different mods until you find a fit that you're happy with. Fortunately, Python makes that extremely easy. Instead of having to scroll up and down through the categories to swap mods in and out, you can just right-click on a mod and select a different variation. Alright, I already made a video about blinging, so I'm not going to regurgitate it here. If you want to know more, check out the link down below. And while I'm at it, I also made an intermediate fitting class where I discuss things like align times, lock times, and stacking penalties. So check that out if you're still hungry for more. Anyway, I didn't talk about abyssals in my how to bling video, so we're going to talk about them now. Alright, mutaplasmids can be used to make uber powerful mods, but they can also be used to beef up lower tier mods for cheap and or lower the fitting requirements to something that just isn't enough to make a particular fit work. In fact, it's kind of like making cheaper variants of faction mods when you do it like this. They may not be as powerful in every respect, but oftentimes that doesn't matter. To show you what I mean, let's take a look at an example. So, I decided to roll out Abyssal MWDs to put on my Incursion Vindies. Using buy orders, I bought 100 decayed mutaplasmids and restrained 500 meganewton MWDs for around 50 mil. Now, If you look at the possible stats that you can roll with this combination, you have the potential of rolling an Abyssal that has better stats than all the faction variants, save for one category. And that's because MWD Mutaplasmas won't affect the cap penalty at all. Thus, Abyssal MWDs made from a restrained variant will always carry a 20% penalty to capacitor capacity. Anyway, I had plenty of CPU and power grid on my Vendies, so I didn't need to worry about that. I could roll maximum penalties in both categories, and it still wouldn't break the mod for my purposes. I also didn't care too much about the SIG radius modifier. Now, the SIG bloom from an MWD will affect income and damage on an incursion battleship, but it's not a super big deal most of the time, so as long as the stat ended up somewhere in the green, I was cool with it. Regardless, the main two stats I was concerned with were speed, which can help my Vendies get into web and optimal range faster, and my activation cost, which can reduce how many cap broadcasts I send Logi's way. So, to review, I didn't need a god roll on all 5 attributes in order to get something that worked for my needs. I cared about cap and speed, and CPU and power grid were my dump stats. Then, after rolling out 100 of them, I picked the 2 that had really good cap and speed rolls and terrible CPU and power grid rolls. Those were the 2 that I put on my Vendies. I then sold my best results for a small profit and then sorted the remainder into 3 containers based on whether or not I thought I could probably find a use for them elsewhere. By the way, I'm pretty sure I heard CCP Rise say somewhere that they were considering implementing some sort of reprocessing for bricked abyssals, but who knows if and when that'll happen. Anyway, it won't always work out this nice. Even decayed mutaplasmas can be relatively pricey or have mutagen ranges that are likely to result in negative rolls. And there can also be a smaller spread in prices between faction mods and the T1 and T2 variants. All of this means is that there are no clear-cut rules for figuring out what your best course of action will be. You have to sit down and consider all of the relevant variables before making a decision. Or you can just buy faction or dead space and be done with it. Remember, your time also has value. Finally, you can also check contracts to see what's available, but the good deals seem to get snapped up rather quickly, so be prepared to peruse through a bunch of overpriced stuff. Also, I should probably provide a word of warning. Don't make fundamental changes to fits unless you know what you're doing. Like, don't go swapping MWDs for afterburners on Doctrine fits or pull off tanking mods all willy-nilly. Now, I wish I could provide bright line rules for when it's okay to make fundamental changes, but there's just way too many variables. Thus, all I can say is that you should get a fair amount of experience with the fit and the activity before you start making drastic changes. And if the content creator says that you have to fit a certain way, don't argue with them while he's trying to stand up a fleet or actually running it. Just do what he says, and if you don't like it, don't fly with him. I use the thought of making a full-blown Python tutorial as a non-addictive sleep aid. Thus, I'm just going to cover the highlights. Anyway, Python is better than the in-game fitting tool in most respects. It does require importing your characters via the ESI, and it doesn't have a dark theme, but it has all sorts of nifty features, such as automatically sorting guns by meta level, setting income and damage profiles, setting target resist profiles, the ability to easily swap variants, sorting ammunitions by range and damage and allowing you to easily swap between them, creating and importing custom implant sets, seeing the effects of drugs, boost, remote assistance, enemy EWAR, and non-plugged-in implant sets, creating custom abyssals so that you can easily figure out what your minimum rolls in each category need to be, and the easy comparison of fits and ships thanks to damage graphs and multiple tabs. Once again, I'm not going to turn this into an in-depth Python tutorial, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how some of these features can help you optimize your fits. First, you almost always know exactly what you will be fighting in PvE. Thus, setting the income and damage profile to that of the rats you'll be facing removes the guesswork and allows you to easily maximize your buffer or repair rate. And do note that if Python doesn't have the damage profile that you need, you can always manually input it via the damage profile editor. Second, damage graphs allow you to easily compare different ships, ammunitions, and fits so that you can maximize your applied DPS. For example, this chart shows how a couple of rather cheap Nightmare fits stack up against the Warp to Me optimal Macarial fit. Moreover, it demonstrates how swapping one of the tracking computers for a target painter increases damage application against one of the harder to hit ships. Of course, stacking penalties mean that you don't want every Nightmare in fleet to have a TP fitted, but having at least one TP in fleet will improve the entire Sniper Wing's damage application. Regardless, if you're ever wondering whether it's better to fit webs, target painters, tracking computers, or ballistic control computers, throw together a damage graph and see. And do note that damage graphs can also be useful for figuring out which ammo types to use at what ranges and at what ranges you should be fighting at. And yeah, I know you won't always know what you'll be fighting in PvP, but certain fits often become common in the meta, and many groups only use a handful of doctrines, so you should get a better feel for what you're likely to encounter and where as you fly more. Anyway, don't assume that you should automatically swap ammo as you move out of your optimal. For example, the optimal range of multi-frequency in this fit is only 45k, but its higher base damage means that it still outdamages Gamma until about 58k. And if you have trouble remembering your ammo ranges, make a cheat sheet and set it to your desktop background or something. Alright, everything else here should be rather self-explanatory. Okay, suboptimal armor tanks seem to be a lot more common than suboptimal shield tanks, so I want to give a crash course on armor tanking. First, however, the most common mistake I see with shield tanking is when people use core defense field purgers when they should be using core defense field extenders. You know what? Let me back up a bit. There are three classifications of shield tanks. First, active tanks use shield boosters to recharge shields. They have the best shield recharge rates, but often have to compromise on their buffer size, have poor cap stability, and need cap to function. Next, passive tanks have a smaller regen than active tanks, but they generally have better cap stability and can function even when you run completely out of cap. They are often paired with passive resist modules and weapon platforms that don't use cap, so that the ship can continue to function even when under heavy nuke pressure. And on a side note, newer players may be wondering why a passive tank would have less than stellar cap stability. Well, that's because the shield power relays increase passive shield recharge at the expense of capacitor recharge. Finally, buffer tanks have the lowest shield regen, but the largest buffers and the best cap stability. They can also operate without cap when paired with passive resist modules. Anyway, I often see people do what I can only describe as mixing buffer and passive tanks. Now, I'm not saying that you should never do that, but you'll typically get more mileage out of going all in on one strategy. So, if you're going to go buffer, fit CDFEs to multiply the effects of your shield extenders. And if you're going to go passive, combine shield power relays with purger rigs to multiply their effect. For example, the buffer fit Caracal on the left has a 32k tank and a 66 EHP per second passive recharge. The passive fit Caracal on the right only has a 19k buffer, but more than doubles its passive recharge. And the Caracal in the middle sacrificed 27% of its buffer for the ability to face tank one extra Nubro in a rookie ship. Anyway, all of that being said, CCP has mentioned buffing shield power relays and giving them a stacking penalty to compensate. So, things might change with the future patch. Alright, when I first started armor tanking, I had to make myself a cheat sheet to keep it all straight. But this is kind of ridiculous, so let's simplify things. First and foremost, layer mods suck. Because of their low bonus and stacking penalties, they will always underperform an appropriately sized armor plate for the hull in question. Of course, they don't carry a penalty to agility or speed or whatever, and are relatively forgiving when it comes to fitting, but you also have resist mods that have the same benefits and are more effective. So I never use them, and I'm not aware of any good fits that do, so let's get them out of here. Next, note that there are skills that affect the penalties and performances of some of these mods, and that damage controls and reactive armor hardeners aren't subject to normal stacking penalties. Much better. Alright, armor plates and Trimark armor pumps increase your buffer. This is exceptionally useful in PvP as it can allow you to withstand alpha damage and give Logi enough time to switch reps over to you. Unfortunately, however, they won't increase the repping power of local and remote reps. Because of this, they are used less frequently in PvE, where buffer is often less important. Next up, we have all the mods that increase your resist. Because of the way game mechanics work, they not only reduce your income and damage, but also increase the effective healing power of reps. For example, If you have 50% resist, every hit point you have will be able to absorb 2 points of damage. Thus, every hit point restored by a Ripper will be twice as effective. And I suppose we should take a deeper look into what's going on. Well, I think the graph probably says it better than I can, but the benefit of resistances increase exponentially and not linearly as your resists approach 100%. Which makes sense, right? With 100% resistance, you take 0 damage. So it makes sense that the amount of DPS required to kill you would approach infinity as your resists approach 100%. And this is also why it's so important to get your armor compensation skills to 5. Because of the way the math works out, rank 5 actually provides the largest bonus. So they're definitely worth the month it'll take you to max them all out. Anyway, you have 7 different options when it comes to resist mods. They come in active and passive varieties, have different levels of efficacy, different fitting requirements, and can boost your resist against a single damage type or all 4. So mostly it's just a matter of mixing and matching until you end up with the best possible tank that your fitting room and cap will allow. Here are a few tips to help you along though. First, single resist mods are usually better if you are tanking against 1 or 2 types of damage, and multiple resist mods become more important against 3 or 4 types. Second, most resist mods are subject to stacking penalties. The weird exception is that a damage control will only be penalized when stacked with a reactive armor hardener, and vice versa. Regardless, damage controls offer a relatively low bonus to armor resist, thus it can be better when stacking penalties are starting to become a problem, but usually other resist mods will give you a better resist profile, and by extension, a larger active tank. Third, the reactive armor hardener will slowly adapt to the damage profile of whatever you're facing, and only suffers from stacking penalties when combined with the damage control. On the other hand, it starts off with a crappy resist profile, takes time to adjust to the incoming damage, and requires training what is a single-use skill for subcat pilots in order to get the most out of it. Thus, even when it does ultimately result in a better tank, it still might not be enough to justify its fitting and cap requirements, especially considering how cheap a lot of faction and Dead Space armor mods are. However, all of that being said, the math sometimes works out in a way that it does provide a substantial bonus to tank, not to mention that it can be useful when you're fighting different pockets with different damage profiles. Long story short, it is situational useful, so don't forget about it. Fourth, adaptive nanoplating and specific resist platings offer the worst bonuses, but they have ludicrously low fitting requirements. Moreover, A-type Dead Space resistant platings are dirt cheap. Thus, they can be very useful on ships that are running out of fitting.
Zottalo, I have missed one.
Assault damage controls are great for PvP because they can help you to outlast opponents, give Logi time to establish reps on you, and perhaps even help you to survive a mistake. In PvE, however, alpha damage is less of a problem, and Logi knows when switches are coming. Thus, their insane temporary resist bonuses usually aren't worth the trade-off of their low passive resist bonuses. Finally, we have armor reppers and the rigs that affect them. Well, and also remote armor reppers, but all of this should be relatively self-explanatory. The main thing that I want to point out is that the 2 rigs will provide a similarly sized benefit, but the nanobot accelerator will cause your rep to cycle faster and therefore cause it to hit your cap harder. So, if I'm only fitting one rig that modifies repping power, I'll often go with the nanopup just because it plays nice with my cap. However, because of stacking penalties, the nanobot accelerator becomes much more worth it if you roll with 2 or 3 rigs that modify your repping power. Real quick, module heat damage spills over into the slots next to them. Thus, you can slow down the rate that your modules burn out by strategically placing them within the fitting window. And do note that it is the fitting window placement that matters. You can still arrange mods in your HUD however you like. Anyway, try to put modules that you're likely to overheat on the sides, and try to space out guns and reps to the best that you can. For example, this is not a good layout. If you overheat your reps or tanking mods, they'll burn out faster because they're all right next to each other. However, if we space out the modules that we intend to overheat, their heat damage would mostly spill over into non-heated modules and into the void. This allows us to heat for longer. Finally, thanks to Colin Byrne for pointing out that you can use AutoFit to quickly refit your ships. And yes, it will pull off fit modules in order to do so. A few recommendations, however. First, make sure that you keep spare ammo, paste, and drones on hand. If you ever have less than the fit calls for, it'll throw up an error box. Of course, you can just close it out, but it is annoying. Second, I never used AutoFit because I thought it didn't save module placement. Thus, I always manually fit my ships in order to minimize heat damage. However, I recently discovered that the client will remember mod position for fits created within that client. Thus, the actual problem seems to be that the metadata concerning position gets lost when sharing between clients and or PIFA. Thus, if you just save a linked or imported fit, it won't remember mod position. Instead, view the fit, reconstruct it by manually placing the mods exactly where you want them, and then save the fit you just created. And presto, you now have a saved fit that remembers module placement. People who watch my burner series may be wondering what happened to part 3. Well, all of the stuff that I intended to talk about there was related to burners, but not specific to them. Thus, I decided to broaden the scope of that video to make it more useful to players. Unfortunately, that also greatly increased the scope of the video. So, there's still some stuff that I did want to talk about, such as multiboxing and hotkeys, but that'll have to wait for another time. Alright, that's it. Don't forget to support all your favorite content creators. And until next time, remember,
Chaos is a ladder.